Over 400 people lost their lives in airplane accidents in 2025, making it the deadliest year for aviation since 2018. In just 1 week, multiple disasters unfolded across the world: a Boeing 787 crash in India, a Beechcraft air ambulance accident in Maine, and a Bolivian C-130 tragedy. Some of these incidents were unavoidable catastrophes, while others were the result of deadly mistakes that should never have happened. But will 2026 be any better? These are the 10 deadliest crashes. Their causes are worse than expected. 6 crew members aboard the Japan Coast Guard 8 weren't thinking about the runway. They were thinking about the Noto Peninsula, where an earthquake had killed more than 200 people, and survivors were still waiting for supplies. The crew had already been delayed 40 minutes and were under pressure to move. When the tower instructed them to taxi to holding point Charlie 5, they moved past the hold short line and onto the active runway, believing they had been cleared to position for takeoff. On final approach, 367 passengers and 12 crew aboard Japan Airlines Flight 516 had no idea anyone was there. The approach was clean: 145 knots, gear down, flaps set, nothing out of place. The aircraft was exactly where it was supposed to be. The problem was that another aircraft was also exactly where it was not supposed to be. Inside the control tower, the runway incursion warning system activated exactly as designed. Red alerts flashed. An aircraft was on the active runway. The warning held for nearly a full minute. Controllers saw it and dismissed it. Years of false alerts had trained them to treat the system as background noise. At 50 feet above the pavement, the Airbus crew saw the 8 for the first time. There was no option left. Captain ST pulled up, but the aircraft was already committed. The left main landing gear tore through the Coast Guard aircraft. Fuel ignited. The 8 was destroyed in seconds. 5 of its 6 crew members died instantly. The surviving captain was thrown clear with severe burns. The Airbus slid nearly a kilometer down the runway, trailing flames, veering into the grass apron. Crew commands were immediate and precise. 379 people were evacuated in 18 minutes. Seconds after the last passenger cleared the door, the widebody was fully engulfed. It was the first hull loss of an Airbus A350 since the type entered service in 2015. Investigators confirmed a simple and lethal sequence: a misunderstood taxi clearance, a warning system dismissed through familiarity, controllers managing too many tasks at once, and language permissive enough to allow a fatal misinterpretation. Haneda was a failure of attention, of language, of systems trained to be ignored. The next crash, 8 months later, wasn't a failure of anything inside an aircraft. It was the result of something fired at it from the ground.
The coordinates on the navigation display started jumping, snapping to positions that made no sense, then correcting, then jumping again. The crew of Flight 8243, an hour out of Baku on a short Christmas morning hop to Grozny, suspected a technical fault and requested radar vectors. What was actually happening was far more deliberate. Russian military electronic warfare units were jamming GPS signals across the entire region, feeding false positions to everything in the sky, civilian and military alike. 67 people on board had no way of knowing that the system they depended on was being actively manipulated. 2 attempts at Grozny failed in thick fog, and as fuel ran low, the crew turned back toward Baku. Clearance was granted, but the relief lasted only 60 seconds. A surface-to-air missile fired by Russian air defenses responding to a Ukrainian drone incursion detonated close to the aircraft's tail section. Hundreds of fragments tore through the fuselage at hypersonic velocity, severing hydraulic lines. A flight attendant in the rear galley was hit, along with passengers in the last 6 rows. The crew could not see the damage, but they felt it. Controls stiffened, and the rudder became sluggish. The aircraft yawed unpredictably with every input. Passengers pressed clothing against shrapnel wounds, while flight attendants moved through the cabin, trying to keep people conscious and seated. One survivor described the plane as moving like it was drunk. Russian airspace was closed to them. Baku was now 300 meters behind them across contested territory. The only viable option was east, across the Caspian Sea toward Aktau, Kazakhstan, flying a structurally compromised aircraft with degrading controls and injured people bleeding in the cabin. They flew 300 meters like that until GPS stabilized over Kazakhstan and Aktau cleared their approach. Finally, what remained of the control authority gave out entirely. The Embraer stalled and struck the ground inverted 3 kilometers short of the runway. 38 people died, 29 survived, most pulled from the tail section, which had separated on impact and come to rest upside down away from the main fuselage. Russia initially denied involvement, but Azerbaijan's president stated publicly within days that the aircraft had been shot down from Russian territory. Months later, Putin acknowledged it and offered condolences. The parallels to MH17 were immediate. A second civilian airliner brought down by a Russian surface-to-air missile in the same region by the same military. Russia eventually admitted what its missiles had done, but admissions do not bring back the dead. While world leaders debated accountability over the Caspian, in Alaska, a pilot was already arguing with his own management about a different kind of preventable death.
Chad Intel had flown Alaska's backcountry routes long enough to know when conditions were bad. On February 6th, they were worse than bad. The Cessna Grand Caravan lifted off from Unalakleet at 2:40 in the afternoon with 9 passengers aboard, heading 110 miles across Norton Sound and Nome. The sky looked passable, but the weight and balance sheet told a deadly story. The aircraft was carrying more than 1,000 pounds over its certified maximum for icy conditions. That number was not a technicality. Under active icing, every extra pound compresses the margin between controlled flight and stall, and the Caravan was already operating in conditions where that margin was shrinking by the minute. The de-icing boots pulsed on schedule, cracking ice from the leading edges. Under normal weight, they would have kept the wings clean, but that day, they could not keep up. Ice accumulated faster than the boots could shed it, adding drag, reducing lift, and quietly narrowing the speed band in which the aircraft could safely fly. At 6,000 feet, the temperature sat at -2°C. Nome Tower called a 30-minute hold for runway de-icing, and Antil slowed to circle and wait. That was the moment the margins ran out. Airspeed dropped, the stall margin collapsed, and the stick shaker fired, followed by the stall horn. Antil fought the controls, but the Caravan had no lift left to give. At 3:28, he made the only decision left. Put the aircraft down on frozen Norton Sound. Without gear at 70 knots, nose low, left bank, the ice hit the fuselage and tore the wings off. The engines separated on contact, and fire spread across the frozen sea in seconds. All 10 people on board were dead before the wreckage stopped moving. The NTSB investigation revealed that Bering Air had flown the same Caravan overweight on multiple occasions in the days before the crash. Antel had raised the issue with management directly more than once. His fiancée told investigators that he said the company pressured crews to carry more cargo than the fuel and weight limits allowed. Management had documentation of his concerns, yet nobody acted on them. A pilot who warned management and was ignored, a crew that never had a chance. 9 months later, another aircraft was pushed past its limits. This time, the failure did not come from ice or overloaded cargo. It came from inside the metal itself, in a place no inspector had ever thought to look. The MD-11 freighter had been flying since 1991. 34 years of takeoffs and landings. Each one flexing metal, compressing bearings, and cycling stress through the airframe in ways no visual inspection could see. On November 4th, it rolled onto runway 17 right at Louisville International, carrying 47,000 pounds of cargo bound for Honolulu. With 3 crew aboard and engines at full thrust, every system was nominal from every angle being monitored. At 165 knots, Captain Richard Wartenberg lifted the nose and the main gear left the ground. For 22 seconds, the flight was routine. Then the left engine pylon aft mount fractured completely. The structure that had been holding 10,000 pounds of engine to the wing, cracking for years in a location no scheduled inspection examined. The GECF-6 engine, still producing 60,000 pounds of thrust, ripped from the wing and tumbled down the runway, trailing fire. Wartenberg had 3 seconds to decide with no good answer. Aboard onto the concrete and slide a burning freighter into the passenger terminal or climb. He chose to climb. The MD-11 gained barely 100 feet before the left gear, clipped a UPS warehouse, and tore through a fuel line. The aircraft banked hard left and struck an industrial yard at 180 miles per hour. The fuselage broke apart on impact. A petroleum facility adjacent to the crash site exploded, feeding the fire that was already spreading from 38,000 gallons of jet fuel. All 3 crew members died instantly. 12 ground workers also died, and 23 more were burned, some critically as the fire spread through the industrial complex before responders could contain it. The blaze burned for hours. The NTSB's preliminary findings identified catastrophic metal fatigue. Microscopic fractures had been propagating through the pylon aft mount across decades of flight cycles, invisible to visual inspection and outside the scope of any existing maintenance interval. The MD-11 had a documented history with pylon integrity. In 1992, a China Airlines MD-11 lost an engine on takeoff from Hong Kong under similar circumstances. Airworthiness directives followed and inspection intervals were revised. Yet none addressed the specific failure mode that killed Wartenberg's crew 33 years later. The aircraft was compliant with every current requirement on the morning it flew its last flight. It simply had more history in its metal than any checklist was designed to find. Some failures hide in the structure of the aircraft, while others hide in the very systems designed to protect it. Oversaw Paolo stayed on a quiet Tuesday night. A plane that should have been grounded flew straight into a SIGMET warning, trusting instruments that had been lying for hours.